Welcome to After Draft, the podcast where Rachel, who's me, by the way, I'm going to refer to myself in the third person a lot, goes on and on about my own writing. So this is a offshoot that I'm just testing today with this pilot episode of a podcast idea that I got really impromptu last night. And I said, let me seize the moment instead of overthinking this too much. But I'm really excited to be here and for you guys to be listening to this. So my idea behind this podcast is to share my notes, my author's notes with you guys, the fun little behind the scenes nerdy bits of content that we don't often get when we see a work that's either shared online or published. Learning from writers and what they have to say is really, really interesting to me. And I realized that I actually really quite enjoy analyzing my own work. Maybe that's because my work brings me immense joy. I don't know why it took me so long to realize this, but writing essentially can be a mystifying process. How does a writer create? And why did a writer choose a certain word in that sentence? And what technique is the writer using in this paragraph? And what is the effect of that technique? Those are some questions that I used to ask myself when I was beginning to learn about my style, learn more about writing, get quite serious about developing my own craft. And I've created this podcast, of course, to analyze my own writing with that question in mind. What magic can we find after the draft? Which sounds good. Also, I'm very excited about the title of this podcast, having so much sound play after draft. The poet in me is extremely excited. But this is a space to talk about why I made certain decisions in my writing and what comes from those decisions. What effects can you create as a writer? And hearing writers, for me, talk about their own intention is fascinating. It's also educational. So I hope this is useful because if you don't know me and you're listening to this right now, I run a YouTube channel called Rachel Writes, where I post educational videos, among other types of videos about creative writing. I write mostly fiction, and I'm also a poet. And while I love my YouTube videos so much, there isn't as much room to really get nerdy and get nitty gritty with it. And I think one of the things that you can learn so much, when it comes to writing is actually seeing a writer's decisions in progress and getting to understand why they were even led to that decision. And also, this is just a lot of fun for me. So maybe this is a whole bunch of excuses to say I have made this podcast to be extremely self-indulgent. And if you're the kind of person who for some reason is really invested in me analyzing my own work, this is the target audience. You've found your place. So that's a little bit about that. Like I sort of just suggested, I'm your host, Rachel Latchman-Singh. I have just finished my BA in creative writing, where I specialized in fiction and poetry. I have written 12 novels. I've published everywhere and been, considered for awards and stuff. But we're not getting that fancy in this podcast where I'm just rambling into a microphone while I'm alone in my room. So let's talk about today's excerpt. So the concept for this podcast is we're going to just pick something from my writing that I particularly like, and we're going to talk about it. And I'm going to try to keep the excerpts as small as possible. So today we're going to be talking about an excerpt from the project I'm currently writing, which is called Body Back. And Body Back is a novella, and it is for basically a project that I started writing in 2019. So I wrote this novel in 2019 when I was 17, 18, called Moth. It is adult literary fiction. If you aren't aware, though I assume most of you are probably from my YouTube channel, but if you're not, hello. Anyways, so Moth I wrote in 2019, 2020, and that book ended up having a sequel called Feeding Habits, and I reread Moth just a couple of months ago, actually in February, and I was amazed at how good it was because back when I wrote it, I hated every single line. It caused me immense distress. I'm not going to lie about that. It was really difficult emotionally for me to be like, okay, I love writing. Writing's what makes me happy, but also writing is what's making me miserable, which is also a motivation behind this podcast. I kind of am doing it for her, that 17-year-old who was like, I suck so bad. Actually, no. 21-year-old Rachel's really impressed by you. Anyways, so I was very inspired by Moth work just a couple of weeks ago, to the point where I was like, I gotta write something else in this, realm. Now, these books belong to a series, and if you were coming from my YouTube channel, I do have a video from my YouTube channel that explains all of this, which is called How I Accidentally Wrote a 10-Book Series. So check that out if you have no idea the context here, because I don't want to spend too long talking about it. But essentially, I ended up deciding to write a novella that went between Moth work and feeding habits, so just a couple of weeks ago, and that is called Body Back. Some people thought I was saying in my video when I talked about this body bag, which is also really cool, but it's body back, like sexy back, Justin Timberlake, which is not where the title came from, but like bonus content because it takes place in 2005. All right, but before we actually get into the context of Body Back, let's talk about Moth work, because Moth work obviously is the parent book. Body Back also takes place like really directly after Moth work. So this is the summary of Moth work. The cabin isn't haunted, but a dead man owns it, and they know which one. It's late August in the dense Oregon wilderness, and 21-year-olds Harrison and Lonan aren't friends. While isolated at a cabin whose mysterious history leads back to the property's owner, Lonan's father, both men bury its secrets to serious consequences. Battling addiction against prescription sleeping pills, Lonan is convinced he's being haunted by the ghost of his father. Alone, Harrison struggles to support him despite his best attempts. Their future is on a downward spiral, and they're both losing control fast. That is, until an attempt to destroy a dark room close by in the woods leads them to discover a photograph of a woman with a complicated connection to Lonan's father. Driven by his paranoia and in desperate need to rid himself of his father's ghost, Lonan convinces Harrison to help him find her. But when Harrison begins feeling the pressure of Lonan's precarious mental health and the woman's presence threatens to unravel their faux normalcy, both men are forced to confront their pasts, the unknown woman, and most secretive of all, the nature of their relationship. So I freaking love that book. It was so good. It's like literally the best thing I've ever written. I was so surprised to read it and actually love it, because I was so embarrassed by it for a long time. Anyway, so this is the log line for Body Back. It's 2005 in Las Vegas, and 21-year-old Harrison is tired of routines, of gods, of men. On a mission to move past a complicated breakup, he's about to get recklessly indulgent, and he's come to the right place. So very excited about this project, obviously. So let's talk about the excerpt I'm going to read in this podcast. And before we do that, we should probably know some stuff about Moth work. I'm not publishing these books, so I'm not publishing Moth work, Body Back, or Feeding Habits. That would be the worst thing in the entire world to ever happen. Not because they're bad, but because they're, voraciously mine. But anyways, so what we need to know, essentially, is that Harrison and Lonan broke up at the end of Moth work. They were never, like, technically dating, but, I would say, that's basically how I would describe the relationship. Just, key smash. But they broke up at the end. Harrison initiated that breakup. At the end of the book, he turns to his mother, who he's newly acquainted with after she abandoned him as a child. They have a really complicated relationship. She was in his life for up until he was 7, and they were really, really close. And she herself was struggling in the relationship with Harrison's father, and she had her own issues and everything. And she ended up abandoning him when he was a kid, and they haven't seen each other really since. So, their relationship's really it's like one of the most complicated things I've ever written. His mother, Susanna, lives in Las Vegas at this time, and Lonan also lives in Las Vegas, but with his new girlfriend, who he kind of stumbles into this relationship, who also, she lives in Las Vegas, right? So Lonan and Harrison are in the same city at the same time, but they're just not together, which is a first for them, which is a really interesting part of Body Back. So in chapter 1 of Body Back, Harrison has broken into a stranger's pool, which is really funny to me, but he's caught by the owners, who are a young couple, and the woman, whose name is Sadie, pities him and calls his mother, Susanna, instead of calling the police. So Suze is trying to be a gentle parent with Harrison when she eventually does come, to confront him about this. Confront being, quite a, nice way to put it. Like, she really isn't trying to be harsh with him because she doesn't really know how to parent him. He's an adult, but also the last time she really knew him, he was a child. When he won't take responsibility at all for what he's done, I mean, he's quite literally broken into somebody's house. He's also like tracked water in all through their house because he's floated in their pool, like fully clothed and everything. Like, he's really a disaster. So when he won't take responsibility for that, she drives him to the apartment where Lonan and his girlfriend live, which is a decision. But, anyways, Harrison is kind of understandably quite upset about this because he's not ready to face Lonan. I mean, Sue's made this decision in desperation. She's not doing it to hurt him. She just doesn't know what else would help him. So it's a really complicated moment. But anyway, because he's so upset, he's not ready to face his ex-boyfriend, basically. He ends up getting Suze to pull over on the side of the road where he gets out of the car and essentially runs off toward the rest of the book where, he gets disastrous. So now I'm going to read the excerpt in which the excerpt I want to talk about exists because I think we need the context of the entire paragraph. Just to note, this is, like I said, unpublished writing, but it is my own work, of course. It's been edited a bit, but it's not been rigorously edited or anything. Anyways, so this is that paragraph. Perhaps Jesus would enter that apartment like it were his father's temple, but Harrison is tired of gods, of ghosts, of men. He repeats this to himself as he hustles through the rain. No gods, no ghosts, no men. His teeth chatter, his hands shake. He's not wise. He never wants to be again. No gods, no ghosts, no men. It's easier this way, no need to contemplate the open window overlooking the parking lot. No need to contemplate who lives there now, who makes a bed there every morning, who drinks his coffee with half a cream, no sugar at the breakfast table, who grinds an ink stick to practice his new interest in calligraphy, who reads poetry on the balcony every Wednesday, who finishes a 1,000-piece puzzle in an afternoon, who wears Susanna's angel pendant and says he bought it vintage, who takes up pottery, herb gardening, darts whenever he feels like it, who sleeps with both eyes closed at last. No need to contemplate what might happen if he spared one glance, who we might see if he just looked back. Ooh, girl, that was so good. That paragraph was such a pain to write. So, I'm giving myself a big round of applause because I made it work. Anyways, so the line I want to focus on, there are actually two. He's not wise. He never wants to be again. Now, if you were on my Tumblr yesterday, which, I had a resurgent moment. I was like, I'm back in 2016. I love Tumblr very much now. I wrote an entire essay talking about this line because, wow, it really stuck out to me. And the thing is, as the writer, I'm really aware of what that line is doing. I'm not sure if that's going to, be conveyed to readers. Obviously, readers who also haven't read the first book, but oh my gosh, reading it, as the target audience, I was like, this is so good. So let's talk about it. Let me just read my tags, my tag essay instead of running in circles. So I said, I could pick apart what this one line means to Harrison at this moment when it's stated, because it's quite literally the thesis of this book, the thesis of Body Back. It's Harrison's emotional thesis. He spent all of Moth work doing the quote-unquote right thing, and I can kind of elaborate on that. All of Moth work doing the wise thing. So in Moth work, they are at this cabin, right? And Lonan can't be in his father's cabin because of his history there. He can't step foot in it, right? So Harrison's like, no problem. We'll figure it out. Let's sleep in a tent. We'll camp. It'll be fun. It's not even a big deal. I can take that in stride. So the next thing is, Lonan's actually ready to enter his father's cabin when he's just alone with Harrison. Okay, great. Well, let's go in. You're ready now? I'm fine. We can do that. So, the next thing is Lonan just wants to dance with me in the bathroom. Cool. He just wants to hold me there. I can be held. That's totally fine. In the bathroom, Lonan thinks he sees the ghost of his father. Okay, well, let's leave the cabin then for good because it's clearly making things worse for him. So, if I was Harrison, I'd say, I want to be as accommodating as possible. It's not working? All right, no problem. Let's get out of here. Next thing is, Lonan can't handle being in Oregon anymore. That's good. I could drive him solo across the country all the way back home. And the whole book progresses like that. And I think it took me until this year to actually understand that the plot of Mothwork really is that. Harrison doing absolutely everything for Lonan. So Lonan having needs and Harrison dropping his entire life to provide them. And in his mind, he's like, this man who I love very much, but is struggling to accept himself. And therefore me, like in his identity and his sexuality, I can handle that, sort of. I can hold that. This man continues to hurt me because he himself is so hurt he doesn't even know how to handle himself. I can handle that too. So for all intents and purposes, Harris is trying to do the right thing in Moth work, and it doesn't work. That's the thing. It doesn't work at all. And what I realized while I was writing this tag essay yesterday is so much of Body Back is Harrison trying so hard to forget that man, and not Lonan, but himself, the man he was who loved Lonan at all. Because if he remembers the person who he was, the person who loved Lonan, he'll also remember how much the love he gave didn't matter. And this line in Body Back is that moment. It's this one moment in Body Back. Body Back is this glittery escapade into self-destruction, right? But there's this one moment, just those two lines alone, the wise line. I can't even remember it now. I have to pull it back up. I can't remember my writing. He's not wise. He never wants to be again. That is a moment where we see vulnerability. We see Mothwork Harrison peek through right there. We see his true feelings. We're not seeing somebody who is just trying to cover up his feelings, who's trying to get so kind of loud, like so partyish, so glitzy to cover the fact that he's extremely hurt. We're actually seeing a real person there because he's very vulnerable there. He knows he was once wise in doing all the right things for Lonan, but he also knows none of that matters because Lonan's not here anymore, and he can't handle that. And that line, those two lines itself, I think, indicate this like immense self-awareness. So I noted that there was pain, there's anger, jadedness, vulnerability, heartbreak, desperation, sadness, longing, certainty, and of course, hurt. And there's just so much to say about this moment. And I want to talk about like my process and like why did that line come there? Now, my writing process is extremely intuitive. It's not something that I force. It's not something that I plan. I'm a pantser. I love to discover as I go. So it's not like I had this line written. It just came to me in a session. But the thing is, like how I see writing is how I see writing poetry almost. It's really sculpting. And in that moment when I wrote this line, I had this moment where I was like, wow, like this is a really big moment for this character. And I was aware of that, even if it wasn't the most consciously aware, because this is coming in the middle of this paragraph that I just read to you guys about, a lot of detail. Like we get kind of a romantic view of what Lonan could be doing, right? That bit at the end about, is Lonan grinding an ink stick to practice calligraphy? Is Lonan reading poetry on the balcony? Like we're getting a romantic idea of who Lonan is. But this line, he's not wise, he never wants to be again, which is Harrison's not wise, he never wants to be again, is coming in the middle of that romance. It's like it's a scythe. Like it literally just goes and it's stabbed right through the middle of this romantic picture, this sort of dreaminess that Harrison is imagining. And the image of this is actually really interesting as further context is he's walking away from his mother. It's raining. I mean, the pathetic fallacy is like turned up to 25 million %. And he's walking away from his mom. He's walking away from the truth because his mom is indicating a truth to him in some regard that, he just can't take, right? And so then to have this line placed there, it's a moment of clarity. It's a moment of breath. It's a moment of I'm actually a human in this second. But you could miss it. If you blink, you could miss it. And that's Harrison's whole thing in Body Back. He's pretending like he's not really a human, but he is. And if you blink, you're going to miss that he's actually deeply feeling things. He's in a lot of pain. He's feeling a lot. And I just love what that line does in that moment. He's not wise. He never wants to be again. I keep thinking about that line. Every day I've been thinking about that line and the implications of it. Honestly, it's just been sticking out to me as I continue to draft this project as a moment of him being aware that he was doing the right thing and that it didn't matter and he doesn't want that anymore. It's in that moment he's deciding, I tried to be a good person. Because this is coming back from his mom telling him, you basically need to get your life together, but in a gentle way. So like in his mind, now he's rebuking her. He's like, but Sue's like, I tried to be a better person. I did everything that I could for this person. I loved Flonan with all of my heart, and it didn't matter. And I don't ever want to do that again. And that really leads us into the rest of Body Back, where he gets, recklessly indulgent, as the log line says, right? Oh, it's so good. Like, it's so good, guys. I'm obsessed with that moment. It is just, I think it's one of my favorite lines that I've ever written. And it's because of the placement. It's not flowery. There's not a lot of description. It's not poetic, but the placement, the context, the subtext. Oh, that is where that line shines. And I want you guys to see, in that line and how I'm explaining, subtext can reveal character. In that moment, we're actually getting a lot of information about Harrison as a human being, even though you wouldn't actually expect it to be a line that does reveal a lot of character. And it can show that what comes around a line and what isn't said in the line is just as important as the line itself, because this line hits hard. I mean, wow. Somebody who's like, big fan of Moth work myself. I love that book so much. Reading this is almost like fan service to me. And it's one of these wonderful things about not really remembering what you write, because when I reread this, I was like, what? Like, even though I just wrote this a couple weeks ago, I forgot that I'd written it. So it kind of blew my mind. And I just, man, I've been having a lot of fun thinking about all the context and why it's there, which is so cool, especially when, you're not a writer who, like, I'm not a writer who purposefully does these things, but I'm also aware of these things. I think subconsciously I follow those impulses, and now I can kind of look back and see what I was doing, and I think it's quite lovely. So I think I'm going to leave the episode there for now, because this is just kind of one line, and I just think it's so cool. So much psychology, so much revealed. And let me know what you think about this new podcast, and if there's other work of mine that you'd like me to analyze. I'm also thinking I could also analyze work of others, but I already do that on my YouTube channel. Actually, I did that once for a series that I never ended up continuing, that I've been meaning to continue. But this is just a little safe space for me and the people who, for some reason, want to hear me listen to me talk about my writing. So if you're one of those people and you've made it this far, thanks so much for listening. And we'll see you in, hopefully, a second episode of After Draft, Rachel's newest podcast in hyperfixation. Thank you so much for listening. See y'all later. Bye.